right?
I've done 4.
You've done 4, so you did this week's for 1143.
Mm-hmm.
So reading accounts for a lot of what we do, obviously, in college. And so what this workshop is going to do is just run through the rhetorical reading notes in order to help you better understand why we're doing them and what it is that the components are asking us to do. So we're going to go over why read rhetorically, rhetorical reading notes, the rhetorical situation, talk about response, note-taking for summary, and then we'll do some practice. We read rhetorically really for 3 main reasons, and that's because 1, we want to enter into an academic conversation, we want to understand the author's lens and worldview, and we want to build knowledge. I like to use the metaphor of a stream when we talk about an academic conversation. When we enter into a classroom, into a new subject matter, we're entering into a conversation that's already been going, like when you walk up to a stream. So running by you is the conversation, and all of a sudden you're going to stick your feet in that conversation and take a bucket, which is your class, and pick up just part of the conversation that's happening, whatever you catch right then. And so your instructor, your class, whatever it is only able to show you a portion of that conversation. But that conversation is going. So when we read rhetorically, we're understanding what is the entire conversation and what am I looking at? How am I positioning myself in the conversation? We also want to understand the author's lens or worldview, and that's really important to understand that even in a class, when a professor says this is a really important text for you to read, that text presents one particular worldview or one particular view on that issue or that topic. And if you understand that author's worldview, you can better ask questions, decide whether you're going to believe that, whether you're going to position or align yourself along with that article. And so we look a little bit deeper into understanding what the person's lens is. And then we also want to build knowledge. When we read rhetorically, we are building our knowledge base and understanding all of the knowledge that is happening within that conversation. And I see that we have 2 other people, so hello. Thank you for joining us. When we are doing our rhetorical reading notes, there are 3 main parts: the rhetorical situation, the response, and the notes for summary. In the rhetorical situation, we're looking at subject, author, audience, purpose, thesis, and structure. First of all, what is the subject? What is the subject that we are looking at? What is the history of that subject? How long have people been studying it? Who else has written about this subject? The author, again, thinking about where is the author coming from? What is the author's credibility? Can I believe this author? So sometimes when we read a paper, we can say, okay, this was published in the Journal of Psychology. However, this person is not a psychologist. This person is actually in education. So what does that mean that somebody in education is publishing in the Journal of Psychology? These are questions that we need to ask. What does it mean I am getting a PhD in education, but I teach writing? So what does it mean that I'm bringing education background when I publish something in a journal about writing? What does that mean that the author is doing that? And what kind of lens, how does that change the author's point of view? And then audience, is that author writing to students? Is it a textbook? Is the author writing to other people that are knowledgeable on that topic? So we really want to think about, am I part of the discourse community? Am I outside the discourse community? What knowledge and assumptions is this author making about the audience? It helps us to understand the audience viewpoint. Then the purpose. Is this author trying to sell us on a textbook? Is the author trying to get us to believe a different worldview, to change our worldview? Is the person trying to tell us that there are certain new questions to be asked in the field? What is the purpose? Is it an argument? Is it informative? It's important for us to understand what effect that author is trying to have on us so that we can fully understand the message. And then we need to understand the thesis statement or the main idea of the text to be able to draw that out. Again, that helps us to understand how the entire paper is structured. And then we look at the structure. The structure means a lot. Where are the main points and the minor points? How can we find the main and minor points? Because that helps us to understand more of what this author is trying to say. So after we understand the entire rhetorical situation, we can then think about our own response. Where are we coming from? What lenses, what background are we bringing to this text? What biases might we already have? Depending on what we have read in the past on the subject really makes an impact on how we're going to understand the text that we're reading. We also want to make connections to other texts. So does this remind you of something that you read in another class? Does it remind you of something that you read on the internet or something you saw on Facebook or that was tweeted? What does this remind you of? Making those connections helps you to remember, but it also helps you to build additional knowledge. Then you want to find areas of confusion. That helps you to be able to understand where you don't belong in the conversation. It helps you to ask questions. You should look up the areas of confusion. Why am I confused? Okay, it's because I've never studied this. Well, what is that? We really want to put ourselves as much as we can in the conversation, and that means finding where we're confused and then learning that material. And that helps us to make new knowledge. Throughout all of this, what we are reading in order to become more academic, more scholarly, to be able to think critically, to be able to think creatively. And so by responding, we're developing those skills. Then the third part of the rhetorical reading notes are the notes for summary. This is where we actually locate the main ideas, separate main ideas from supporting ideas, and identify key examples. By doing this, we're digging a little bit deeper, and when we can summarize, we internalize. So when we can read something, and then we just read it, and we gather some surface knowledge. When we can summarize something and articulate the person's main ideas, that's when the learning happens. When we can actually put somebody else's ideas into our own words, we start to learn it. So very quickly, I ran through why we read rhetorically, talked about the parts of the rhetorical reading notes, talked about the rhetorical situation, why we respond, and notes for summary. We have a little bit of time, so before we get into the practice, what of these areas do you understand? What of these areas do you maybe struggle with or have questions about? We can talk about that.
I guess sometimes the context of who the audience is difficult to pull from a text, depending on what you're reading, like who he or she is addressing.
Right. So what are some of your tips that you think you might have? How can we figure that out?
We can find, by looking for those keywords, like critics or something along those lines is always helpful. But sometimes it seems they're talking on a topic, but aren't necessarily always addressing an audience specifically.
What I do is I look at who published it. So especially with textbooks or with any kind of academic text, some of them, if they're by McGraw-Hill or Pearson, then they're definitely textbooks written for students. But sometimes we're given a text from Rutledge or Houghton Mill, another textbook company, or any university press. And usually those aren't written for students, those are written for other scholars. Or if you're looking at a journal of psychology, a journal of sociology, the business journal, those are written for people in those disciplines. So we can look at the publisher and say, where was this published? Who was this published for? And that's how we can kind of determine that audience. And then it really helps us to be like, oh, this was not written for a student. It looks like a textbook, feels like a textbook, but this was written for other scholars. Or it was written for maybe graduate students, but being used in undergrad because some of it is relevant. Well, then how do I step into that? Or what questions do I need to ask to be able to step into that conversation? So oftentimes that helps. But again, language also. What language is being used? Is it specialized language? Is it general language?
Let's see here.
This will give me a moment. If anybody online has any questions, let me know.
I guess one other difficulty is, for example, in the text we read on satire, right? So it's such a small selection of the overall thing that you wrote that it's kind of difficult to because he covers so many broad stroked areas in that selection that it's hard to point at what exactly his main, I guess, purpose is.
Yes, yes. So I was going to say that too. I was going to say purpose. That is often troublesome. Like when we put together selections for both 1101 and 1143, we're taking selections from larger works. And when you take a selection from a larger work, it is more difficult to find the purpose. I find a Google search is really easy. Like, can I find on Google Books the back of the cover of that? Or if I can find and read the introduction to that book, that often helps to understand the whole entire purpose. Like, what is this person trying to do here?
I felt guilty in doing that, like I was cheating the project. If I was Googling it out, you know.
Well, no, actually, it's not cheating it at all. So when we look at context, like D here says, identify one or two significant historical circumstances of the text production. You can't do that unless you Google. Like, we're really trying to push you to say you should be using Google. And actually, I teach online at face-to-face, and I tell students, pull out your phone, look it up, like right now, and then we all look it up together. And so it's really important to use all those tools. Yeah, it's not cheating. Never. If you're a student, that just means that you're using your critical thinking skills in order to look it up. Yeah. Any other questions? Or?
Well, that's about a lot.
Okay, do you understand the historical context and question on the rhetorical?
Oh, I do. I do understand. You know, I do Google the historical context because that helps you, you know, when you look at the author, you know, like you do the research on the author's background, and then when you research the text background, you know, a lot of times you'll find on the publisher's page where they produced the text if it caused any major changes in any one area or something.
Yes, that's really awesome to look at that. I look at how many editions there are of something to find out, you know, how valued is this text? If it's in its 7th edition, it's really valued. And then what competitors might there be of this text? What other ideas are there? That's awesome. I use Wikipedia for context-wise. Like, I would never use it in a paper, but Wikipedia has so many clickable. You can click on every term. So you look somebody up and it'll say this person is in these areas. I don't know what those areas are. And you click on each of those areas and read just a couple sentences, and you're like, oh, finally, I get a little bit of understanding of what's going on.
Wikipedia is very useful, but
Very.
It's very scrutinized for its source.
Well, it crowdsources now, and so it's more credible than it was when it first started. I mean, if you go in and really mess it up, it's going to change back within 30 seconds. I mean, somebody's going to go in and say, no, that's not right. So it is much more credible. It's also a good place to find resources. So like at the end of, you'll see other resources, and oftentimes they're scholarly resources, so that helps. So we're going to move on and watch this video. It's a short video. And I'm going to give you a rhetorical reading note sheet. And kind of try to fill out as much as you can for this video. And for those at home, just in case the video isn't working for you, I'm going to post the link in the group chat. It'd be really good if you would acknowledge that you're here through that group chat, please. I see that some of you posted questions under questions and not in the group chat. So I've been utilizing group chat. I didn't see the questions till now. Let me look at those real quick. Looks like Kayla asked about the historical context. So the historical context is looking at the overall conversation. Where is this person coming into this conversation? And then there's the question of, can we use the background of the author to direct us to the target audience? Or we really base it on the language of the work, as you said. So a couple things here, Kayla. We can use the background of the author to direct us to target audience, yes. But just because somebody has a particular background doesn't mean that they're writing for that audience. So for example, I have a background in both composition and education. but I could write about discourse analysis. And that would not be written for people in the field of education. It would be written for people in the field of English. So knowing my background doesn't necessarily mean that I'm writing to that. Another great example is Noam Chomsky is a linguist. His background is linguistics. However, he writes a lot about politics. And so when he writes about politics, he is not writing to linguists. He's writing to people interested in politics. So it's really important at that point when somebody switches between different discourse communities to really think about where it is being published and the audience of that publication, and also to think about the language. Is it specialized language? Is it generalized language? So that's really important. And then Rain, you asked about the significance of the publisher, and the significance there is to figure out, again, to help us figure out the audience. And also some publishers are more credible than other publishers. Nowadays, you can self-publish through Amazon, and those self-publications may not be as credible as a university press or as credible as McGraw-Hill. So that also helps us determine how credible the author is and how believable the author might be. I'm now going to focus on the group chat. Hopefully you can see the group chat. And there I've posted this link, and we're going to look at the rhetorical reading notes through this particular video. And I am not allowed to get his. Okay, so my volume is not working.
It's muted on the computer.
It looks like it's not muted.
Approaching my daughter's third birthday, my wife said, "Hey, why don't you take some..." Photography has been my passion ever since I was old enough to pick up a camera. But today, I want to share with you the 15 most treasured photos of mine. And I didn't take any of them. There were no art directors, no stylists, no chance for reshoots, not even any regard for lighting. In fact, most of them were taken by random tourists. My story begins when I was in New York City for a speaking engagement, and my wife took this picture of me holding my daughter on her first birthday. We're on the corner of 57th and 5th. We happened to be back in New York exactly a year later, so we decided to take the same picture. Well, you can see where this is going. Approaching my daughter's third birthday, my wife said, "Hey, why don't you take Sabina back to New York and make it a father-daughter trip and continue the ritual?" This is when we started asking passing tourists to take the picture. You know, it's remarkable how universal the gesture is of handing your camera to a total stranger. No one's ever refused, and luckily no one's ever run off with our camera. Back then, we had no idea how much this trip would change our lives. It's really become sacred to us. This one was taken just weeks after 9/11, and I found myself trying to explain what had happened that day in ways a 5-year-old could understand. So these photos are far more than proxies for a single moment or even a specific trip. They're also ways for us to freeze time for 1 week in October and reflect on our times and how we change from year to year, and not just physically, but in every way. Because while we take the same photo, our perspectives change, and she reaches new milestones. And I get to see life through her eyes and how she interacts with and sees everything. This very focused time we get to spend together is something we cherish and anticipate the entire year. Recently, on one trip, we were walking, and she stops dead in her tracks, and she points to a red awning of the doll store that she loved when she was little on our earlier trips. And she describes to me the feeling she felt as a 5-year-old standing in that exact spot. She said she remembers her heart bursting out of her chest when she saw that place for the very first time 9 years earlier. And now what she's looking at in New York are colleges, because she's determined to go to school in New York. And it hit me. One of the most important things we all make are memories. So I want to share the idea of taking an active role in consciously creating memories. I don't know about you, but aside from these 15 shots, I'm not in many of the family photos. I'm always the one taking the picture. So I want to encourage everyone today to get in the shot. And don't hesitate to go up to someone and ask, will you take our picture? Thank you.
Okay, so that video. I'll give you a second.
I'm ready.
We can talk about all the questions and kind of know what they are. So we'll go through them and talk about it. So in terms of context, where is this being published?
It was from TED Talks.
TED Talks. So would we consider that credible or non-credible?
I would say it's fairly credible.
Right. So TED Talks just itself, the videos that are posted there are more credible than something posted on YouTube. So right there where the publication becomes really important, because one publication all of a sudden has some credibility to it. We assume they choose credible speakers. So the speaker already has credibility. But then here we can look at who the speaker was. Did you capture?
It was Stephen, I think it was
Addis. And did you capture what it said underneath?
Oh, it was kind of small.
Okay, so he is the CEO of a company that does advertising, but he calls himself a brand expert or brand something. So he brands things, and he's a professional photographer as well. So here, knowing that he's a professional photographer, knowing that his career revolves around marketing and advertising, how does that change or enhance what he said, what he's saying?
I don't think it changes or enhances it, but it kind of shows, because advertising is essentially kind of similar to documenting your life in some way or another, I guess.
Right. So knowing that he's an advertiser and he's trying to tell you to document your life, would you have said that if you hadn't known that he was an advertiser, or if you thought that he was just a father that was, was a teacher?
I probably wouldn't have made that connection.
Right. So we make different connections based on who the author is. Knowing who the author is, we're like, oh, he's advertising. Here we're advertising that we're a father. We're showing, hey, this is my fatherly picture. And so it's branding yourself as a role, right? And you wouldn't have gotten that if you didn't know he was an advertiser. So understanding the context is really important, and he presents the history here. This is a history lesson. This is something he and his daughter have done for a long time. Now the structure, think about how he has structured his speech, how he's standing, what he's using for visuals. What do you think about that?
I guess, it kind of strings you along through the video to get to his point. I guess, he's kind of telling the story, but he doesn't really get to the point until the very end. I guess that's the best thing I can go with, the structure, the way he approached it.
I like how you said stringing along, because he uses pictures to do that, right? So he's like, he uses pictures as his transitions. And when he gets to picture 14, he doesn't reveal the 15th one, he stops. He tells the story of the red awning in the doll store. Then he presents the last one. So he's kind of using these visual cues in order to structure it and just to string you along, as you said. In a written work, headings often do that for us. So we can think about those structural cues, and that helps us to understand maybe which picture or which idea is the most important and why that might be the most important. Which ones does the author spend the most time on? And here it was pictures 1, 14, and 15 were the ones where he really paused. So understanding structure adds to the meaning. Purpose. What's his purpose?
His purpose is to tell you to consciously create memories.
Yeah. And people at home, you can definitely chime in. I keep looking at group chat, hoping that you will say something. Yeah, so his purpose is to hope that you will take his ideas of photography and bring that into your own life. So he's trying to influence you to do something, right? But he's not trying to argue really anything, is he? Not so much?
No. Influence, I think.
Influence, yeah. So understanding that tells us how strongly, whether or not we're supposed to do something, how strongly the position is being taken, if he's asking us to change our minds or just take a different action, influence us to do something. If we kind of think of quickly, because we're starting to run out of time, response and notes for summary. So the response, would you have agreed with anything, disagreed with anything? Did it remind you? Would you pulled in another text in your response?
I don't know, it's pretty short, and what he said I think most people agree with, that documenting your life is kind of important, because as you get older, you have those gaps of life that you didn't do a whole lot of that in, and you kind of look back and wish you did, because you don't have any way of looking back at it.
That's awesome. That's awesome, because I think that might add to his purpose, right? This idea that you might lose time or not have a year where you didn't document, and that you miss out on something later in life by not having done that. It's interesting. Cool response there. And then summary, just in general, what main ideas would you have pulled out? Would you have, if you were writing a summary, would you have pulled a specific example in particular, or would you have been more general?
I would have been probably more general. Talking about family and the importance of memories, and like neat ways that you can go about doing that. Yes, because that's pretty cool way to do it. There's a lot of variables. The same spot every single year.
Would you have that named the spot in your summary? Would you say it was New York? Is that an important detail to add?
Well, it's an important detail, but I think it would be more the street corner, because New York's pretty big, right? So it's that specific street corner, which is really the the spot they have to go back to every single time they take pictures.
That's awesome. So you'd actually put that detail in. Yeah. Good. Fantastic. Now let me see if there are any additional questions here. Oh, Rain was asking how to use group chat. Sorry, I'm back on questions if you want to add any questions, but if you were to kind of hover over the broadcast, you should be able to see additional options. And one of those options is to group chat. Sorry that you missed out on that. But do you have any additional questions, Rain or Kayla? Okay, I don't see any. So thank you so much for participating today. Thank you for participating. And have a great day.
I was like on the spot.